The next question I'd like to ask is the power, because with negotiation you always run into a power struggle. You're negotiating with someone of different from a different role, potentially different vision as well. What are some of the sources of power that you can tap into as you begin to negotiate
That's a
in your
great
mind?
question because I think a lot of people assume that power comes from position, and it is one of
Hmm.
the sources of power, but power comes from a number of other sources as well that can be developed by someone who doesn't have positional power. One is
Hmm.
information. Do you
Hmm.
have valuable information that the other side doesn't, right? Do you know things? Are there things of value? The other piece to gain power is, do you know the other side's objectives, whether it be, a boss or someone that you're negotiating with for an agreement? What are they trying to achieve? So I find a huge source of power for a more junior person is really spending time understanding the other side's objectives and then seeing what is it that you can contribute to helping them achieve that, because I think that's a source of much power because you may have a different idea. I also encourage people to become creative problem solvers. Um, and I can tell you, having been a lawyer, no one really wants the lawyer in the room, if they're honest. And I needed to be in the room. So I often had to negotiate to be able to participate. And my negotiation strategy was to be someone who always had great ideas and brought value that may have nothing to do with my negotiation objective was, but it could be introducing people to other people. That's a source of much value. Providing a book recommendation for something that you think
Hmm.
might be valuable to the other. Like, I think people devalue the things that they have to offer and all of these things, because part of the power comes from building a relationship. If you build a relationship with someone, a genuine one, where you're providing value, then when it's time to come for an ask, you have something that counterbalances that ask. And if you've done it right, you also can show how your ask furthers the other side's objectives, which then makes it less of an ask and more of a sort of um, mutual effort to achieve a common goal.
I think that from my experience as well, early on in my career, I've certainly come across people with a higher authority, with power, who have tactics, who are experienced in tactics, trying to put you on the defensive, right, in different situations. So, as a trained negotiator and a leader, I think what I've noticed is that sometimes delaying or departing from that or interrupting that negotiation sometimes is a technique to kind of balance out the the two sides or the two goals of a negotiation, particularly in those cases where there's a tone, there's a problem where somebody doesn't really want to enter a negotiation and tells you right off the bat, for example, you're not ready for this responsibility. So rather than counter arguing right away, which is the natural instinct, right, which then kind of makes that negotiation stuck and you can't really provide any more value, sometimes it's best to delay that negotiation at that point, stay silent, ask questions, or wait for another opportunity to and re-enter that negotiation. What would you comment to my thought
No,
as an expert? So.
you identified a few things that I think are really critical. Time is an element of negotiation. So
Hmm.
if it can't happen now, can it happen later? I think
Hmm.
that's a wonderful, it feels like the conditions are not right, you know, delaying can be a great tactic. You also talked about questions. I think asking, if you've read the Stephen Covey's 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, which I think is a critical read for every leader, there's
Right.
part of that seek to understand versus to be understood. So in this case, if someone said you're not ready,
Hmm.
a seek to understand question would be, well, tell me what you think it would take for me to be ready. What would I need to demonstrate? Because you will gather a lot of information if you ask. I call them disarming, but they're really critical thinking questions. And they're literally to gain an understanding. And in the situation, if you argue,
Yeah.
people will be, if you're defensive, the other side will be defensive. There's another
Yeah.
great book called Your Brain at Work. And you want to
Hmm.
be in a situation, negotiation, where nobody's defensive. So instead of saying, I disagree with you, say, well, that's really interesting. I would like to understand more. I value your opinion. Help me understand. What would it take? And actually a really critical question that comes from Scott Works Negotiation, and they do training around the world if people want to go really deep, is if you get stuck in a negotiation, and this is, I call it the magic question, what would it take? And in this case, you could say, well, what would it take for you to consider me ready? Nobody's making a commitment. You're just trying to understand. But in any situation, asking what would it take will give you a sense of where they're coming from and how far apart you really are, which is really valuable information to decide, do I pull back or do I keep moving forward with this discussion? So using these tools, again, each situation might need a slightly different set of tools, but
sure.
If you're ever stuck, asking critical questions or buying yourself more time are two great techniques to get to the outcome that you want, or at least give yourself a higher likelihood of that happening.
Sure. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you very much. I think this is a very helpful lesson from you that many of all our coach listeners and many of those in our both networks are going to find valuable, I think. So thank you. What would it take? Yeah, absolutely. And just going back to that case that I mentioned, having waited for the right opportunity and coming back to that discussion and that negotiation. So what was at the initial position termed as a waste of time ended up being a late breaker and a game changer for the entire organization, and helped create a new resource and re-energized the organization, for example. To the other point on the what would it take, like that what if question. If you're a vendor, for example, and you have a great solution for your industry, but that is hesitant, it's something new, it's something groundbreaking, maybe a what if could be a 3-month pilot trial, right? That people could offer. So I think it has so many applications and many aspects.
And I would tell you that you just hit on another thing that is really an effective negotiation, is to try and de-risk it for the other side. And a pilot or a test, I used to offer this as a solution for a lot of things. If you want people to try something new, they don't want to go all in. They want to know it's going to be successful. So actually just using the word pilot or test allows people to say, I'm not making a big commitment. I'm making a small commitment. And if it doesn't work, I can get out. And it allows you to demonstrate. So that often, especially in a commercial situation, or even in a situation with another team within your own company, let's run a small test. If the test is successful, and you can then get the commitment. If the test is successful, will you do X? And again, you can set the parameters for success, but you've essentially negotiated the test and what comes next in a position where you generally don't have a lot of power, but you're basically creating the power through this test and setting up what will happen if the test or the pilot is successful.